is an absolutely beautiful winter day here. We are mid-December. We're approaching the Christmas holidays. And I thought I wanted to do another walk and talk video, give you guys a little update on the homestead too. But before we jump into the video, I want to mention that if you have been looking for my live streams, they're all off YouTube now. And I put a question out to the folks who follow me on YouTube, asking which platform do you think, which alternative free speech platform should I use? And I'm actually using a number of them. I'm on BitChute, and Rumble's the one. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm on Odyssey. I, of course, have my own platform, FromTheField.tv, which is uncensored, and it's where I post everything. Not only myself, but other content creators as well. So all my live streams are there as well. But I ask people, just because when it comes to my attention, I can only spend so much time on a computer or a phone, and I really only want to spend so much time. There's some people that they're just on there all the time, and I want to be doing this. Like, I don't, I try to keep the time that I answer comments or things like that consolidated, and so I've decided to use Rumble as our second alternative platform. So my number one alternative platform is my own platform, FromTheField.tv. If you want to just check that out, go sign up. It's 7 days free. Just check out. We have thousands of videos in there. And we also have a feature called Community Questions, where people can make little videos and ask me questions, and I'll make a response. There's a lot of those in there. Go and check it out. So that's our number one alternative platform. You probably are seeing this on YouTube, most likely, because it's where I have my largest following. And I'm grateful for YouTube to be able to have got to a point in my career where I've got a good following, and I've also been able to establish my own alternative platform. YouTube really allowed me to do a lot of that, so I'm grateful for that. However, the censorship is getting real. And I have been doing my live streams on YouTube for a number of years, and that's all gone great. I did get a community strike not too long ago for mentioning the injection, and so I don't really want to throttle my speech. And so what I'm doing as sort of a proactive countermeasure, and I did this before, but I kind of stopped doing it. I don't know why. I think I just wanted to see how long see how my live streams would perform if they stayed on YouTube. And so what we had done for a number of, maybe even more than a year, is we would do my live streams on YouTube. I would answer From the Field members' questions, and then we would take it down in 24 hours. So we're going to go back to doing that. But we're also going to back up all the live streams to Rumble. And so they are there now. So if you want to just check out my Rumble channel, it'll be in the show notes of this video. Just go and check that out. And everything's there, actually, my entire archive. And so that's where the streams will be. Of course, all the videos I create are at FromTheField.tv. And I mentioned this when I brought up the whole thing with Rumble, or where is the alternative platform to post to, is all of my long form detailed content is going to be up at FromTheField.tv. And so I'm no longer doing stuff like that on YouTube as much. And the main reason is the algorithms. So it's been really interesting to observe the patterns in how YouTube has changed over the last number of years. And I really noticed that my views have gone down overall. But the thing that I discovered is views have gone down for a lot of people. And actually, there was a commenter on YouTube who actually brought this to my attention. So all credit to him or her. But I believe the reason for my view count isn't actually necessarily censorship. There might be an element of some kind of shadow banning to that. But I think actually what it is that there's a lot of competition in the genre or space that my channel's in. So there's a lot of off-grid channels. There's a lot of gardening channels. Fortunately, I was an early adopter. And so, I'm not scraping for crumbs like a lot of newer content creators are. Of course, you can always play the clickbait game. You can just put tits and ass or some kind of shocking title in. I don't like to do that much. However, I do to some degree. I definitely don't put tits and ass in the videos. But where was I going with that? So basically, yeah, so what we're going to continue to do is create videos like this. Some homestead videos for sure, but not as much in the past, because on my channel, they just don't get that many views. So as a content creator, you gotta, or as an entrepreneur, you gotta go where you're being directed, in a sense that, you know, if the money and the metrics and the numbers are pointing in one direction, you would be silly to not go in that direction. So the thing that's really interesting is that my commentary videos, like the one we're doing right now, get far more views than videos I do about stuff on the homestead. And I think that has to do with, one, there's a lot of competition for homesteading and gardening content, as well as people have probably seen me do a lot of the same things. So I'm saving that kind of content for my own platform, FromTheField.tv, because there I'm not incentivized by an algorithm. I can just post what I think will help people, and I can title it totally according to what the subject matter is. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And so that's this little piece. I've already gone a little too long on this whole thing, but go to Rumble if you want to see all my live streams. They're all there now. Again, link will be in the show notes. So before I get into what I want to talk about in this video, I just want to give you guys a quick little homestead update. So it's the middle of winter, and we've had an incredibly beautiful winter. It's been cold. It's been like this since November 4th, which is crazy. Basically had a week and a half of fall weather. It's from a late summer, which was really nice. Week and a half of fall, boom, winter, snow on the ground, hasn't melted since. And now it's really set because we're getting as low as minus 20 Celsius at nighttime. But the homestead has actually been better than ever, and that partly is to do with the fact that I have 4 greenhouses, and I'm going to be making a video soon about all of these in detail. There'll be a sort of a full spread analysis of each greenhouse at FromTheField.tv, and then we'll do sort of a summary video that'll come up on YouTube soon. But I have 4 greenhouses. I got my high tunnel, I got my chicken tunnel, I got my passive solar greenhouse, which is the big daddy of them all, and then I've got my hothouse, which is kind of an upgraded high tunnel. And there's food in 3 of them. The hothouse is decommissioned right now because I'm getting it prepared to do late winter, early spring crops. So I've kind of froze it out to clean out the soil. And now I'm reactivating the climate battery in there, letting it get warm, and I'm cleaning it up and preparing those beds. But the passive solar greenhouse, we've been eating fresh food from that all winter long. And the high tunnel has all my overwintered crops. So my cold crops, the greens, the roots, things like that, some brassicas, kales, and broccolis and stuff like that. And the chicken tunnel is just crushing. I mean, I'm still collecting 10 eggs a day with these birds. And they get a lot of light in this setup. And so this has really brought a new level to the homestead. And it's really made me see that you can do very well in a cold climate if you have greenhouses. So more on that later, but what I wanted to talk about in this video primarily is a really interesting trend that I'm observing. And I don't think I'm breaking any major news stories here because I'm no expert economist, but I can read a chart, I can look at trends, and I can observe macro things, which I think I'm fairly good at. And my pattern eye that I learned from studying permaculture has been really adapted to recognizing patterns in other things, not just natural systems or agricultural systems. And a big pattern that I'm looking at right now is that interest rates in Canada, well, interest rates around the world are going up. But this has a particular devastating or potentially it has a devastating downside and a huge upside for people who are prepared for it. And so interest rates are going up, and at the same time, inflation is crazy. Inflation is insane. So interest rates are climbing and inflation is climbing. And on the inflation side, if you just pay attention to prices, how can you not see that there is insane inflation? I wouldn't call it runaway inflation, but I learned from my dad. One thing my dad used to say, which I always thought was really cheesy, he'd say, "I don't believe in much, but I believe in prices." My brother and I would always kind of laugh and how ridiculous that seemed at the time, because he would look at prices in the grocery store and he would just kind of make observations about the macro economy. And he was often, I would say actually every time, he was right about macro observations just by looking at prices on the shelf. And I kind of learned that from him. But if you look at the price of food right now, it's absolutely insane. So, I mean, one thing I've observed is the price of some of the common products we use. So we use a lot of butter. And fortunately, we get butter from a local grower, a local producer that I know. So I feel very secure in our supply of butter because I don't produce but my own butter. But the price of butter, starting around kind of when the lockdowns started, went from about $8.99, $9 to $10 really quickly. Then it started to go 11, 12 to right now. Butter is a standard cube of butter is $16 Canadian, and that's organic. That's certified organic butter. But that's insane. That's in a couple years. That's like a 50% jump, and it's not just butter. It's all kinds of food. So I mean, the time to grow your own food and produce as much of it as possible is more important than ever if you're like, somewhat middle class or less, and you don't want to go broke just feeding yourself. Starting to take control of your food is more important than ever. So inflation is insane, but interest rates are getting crazy. So I'm going to talk about Canadian numbers here, but it's not too far off from global numbers. But here in Canada right now, the what do they call it? The overnight rate is 6.45. So that's the rate that if you go to any kind of typical bank, the main chartered banks in Canada like TD, CIBC, Scotia, RBC, what have you, Bank of Montreal, you'll get a mortgage at 6.45%, which if you compare that to the previous 10 years, it's climbed about 3.75 points in the last year, whereas the previous 10 years to that, it didn't move much more than a point. But if you pull the lens back on interest rates and you go back to the 80s and even before, you can just search prime interest rate in Canada and you can pull up this same chart. You get this kind of graph that goes like this. It spikes in the 80s, where in the 80s they were up to about 18%, a bit higher. And then it basically declined and then hit the floor for the last 10 years. So basically, 2010 up until 2021, it was at the floor, and the rate didn't change at all. Like it just marginally would move up or down. And so what we're looking at right now is, I'm always one to try to fill in the blanks on trends. And Brownie Bob is just getting his cock on there hard. And what you can see is this peak. It's almost like a skateboard ramp. It was way high in the 80s, went down at the floor, and now it's really climbing. And so one would suspect in Canada, we have 5-year mortgage terms. So this is very different than the United States. In the US, you can go get a mortgage and lock your interest rate in for, I don't know what it is, 20 or 30 years. In Canada, you can only lock in for 5. I think sometimes there's 10-year ones, but they're very uncommon and they're higher rates. And so most people who get a mortgage in Canada will lock in. Especially, you can get these variable rate mortgages, which in a low interest rate environment are not economical at all, but they might be going forward as things change, because people might think that they're going to go back down. I don't. But I'm looking at this chart and it starts to look like a skateboard ramp. And the big problem and potential opportunity is that people who bought a house in the last 5 years bought at the top of the market. The average home price in British Columbia, and I wrote this down here, is $736,000. Okay, that's ridiculous. Americans, keep in mind that Canadian dollars are, generally speaking, 25% lower than the U.S. dollar. So I think today, $1 US gets you $1.36 in Canada. And our on the shelf prices are very similar to the U.S. I've always said, prices in Canada are the same per Canadian dollar as they are in US dollars on average. Obviously not the case in the housing market here. But BC is one of the more expensive markets in Canada, especially when you look at the cities. Vancouver is insane, but also in Ontario, Toronto is insane. So if you bought a house in the last 4 years and you paid around $736,000 for that house, if you would have bought it last year, you got in at probably 5%. If you bought it today, you're getting in at 6.45%. If you bought it a few years ago, you got in pretty good. I mean, I had to renew my last mortgage in my house in Kelowna that we sold, and I went into a new term at 1.97. It was actually lower than when I got in, and then I sold it a year later, so I had to pay a little penalty because I broke my mortgage term, which is common. But it was still cheap. And so you buy a property now, let's say you buy a $736,000 house in BC or a piece of property at 6.45, you're paying just under $4,000 a month for your mortgage. And you got to stack in taxes, costs, there's all kinds maintenance costs, there's all kinds of other things you're going to stack in there. But, $4,000 a month that's no chump change, for a lot of people. That is a significant part of their income, especially in BC, because people in BC are typically very stretched, very thin. So if mortgage rates go up to 10%, so that same house goes up to 10%, now you're paying $5,200 a month plus operation, maintenance, and taxes. That is almost enough to break a lot of people, because if people are already stretched thin enough as they are, they're not going to have an easy time servicing that mortgage. And so the tragedy of it is that if you bought at the top of the market at a higher interest rate, and then interest rates keep going up, in order to service that mortgage, it's going to be very difficult. And what my prediction is that as the interest rates are going to continue, and in my opinion, they're going to have to continue, in the sense that if the interest rates are too much lower than the inflation rate, there is less and less and less incentive for people to save money, and that will be a recipe for an earlier collapse. I think that they're going to have to keep creeping up interest rates to keep up with inflation so that it doesn't pop the bubble. Now, we could go on about what will pop the bubble. I mean, I think that the governments of the world are going to run the central bank digital currencies, and that they're going to use that to avoid runaway inflation. I think that's the longer game, but we won't get into that in this video. But on the mortgage side, if you got into a mortgage a couple years ago and you're already paying a lot and your term is coming up in a few years, you're starting to think, man, interest rates keep going up. If we don't do something, we're not going to be able to afford our house in 5 years, because when we have to go to renew at the end of this cycle or the end of this term, we can't afford it. And so a lot of people are going to try to sell their houses at the same time. And that kind of fits with the whole you'll own nothing and be happy piece on the macro perspective of our benevolent dictators at the World Economic Forum that nobody elected. But that's what these cronies want to do. And when you look at institutions like BlackRock, who have been going up and doing aggressive buy-ups of massive amounts of real estate and foreclosures, it all kind of seems to make sense, in that if they want you to own nothing, they can just throttle the rates and basically make everybody lose their equity. That's the scary and depressing part. If you're pinched in that way, is that you got into this mortgage at a crazy inflated value of your home, and now you can't afford it, so you have to foreclose. But when that house goes back up on the market, it might go up for 50% or less of the value you paid for it, which is crazy. But actually, if you look into what some smart entrepreneurs did in 2008 in that real estate boom, there was actually ways to get out and then get back in. And so it's not something that I'm going to really talk about, but there are ways around it. But this could be a huge opportunity, because if you can see this coming, and you're one of these people that probably watches my videos or other channels like mine, and you want to get on the land and you want to do something like this, you might have a really good opportunity coming up very quickly. As long as you're in a position where you can spend the money and you've got some cash that you can put a fairly good sized down payment on, or you could just buy it outright, because people are going to be foreclosing. There's it guaranteed. If this trend continues, and I don't see how it could not continue. Interest rates came up 3.75 points in the last year, and the previous 10 years, they didn't move much more than a point. Come on, it doesn't take an expert economist like Peter Schiff or some of these guys. I'm not necessarily the biggest Peter Schiff fan, but he is right on a lot of things. Not on crypto, that's for sure. But you can look at this and say, yeah, there's a trend here, and it might be time to get out, because I don't see a lot of people selling just yet, because we're probably still a number of years away from this. And having said all that, this whole thing is going to be a long grind. I don't, the more I've been really paying attention to everything happening, the less concerned I am about it, because I really think the powers that be, or the powers that should not be, are going to use the typical economic levers to move things around. The whole system is based on banking. It's based on centralized state capitalism. And they're going to just use the markets to crush people. A lot of people in the truth community think that it's all this stuff. They're changing the trustees around. They're changing all this stuff on the back end, legal end. I'm not so sure. I'm not so convinced of that myself. I think they're going to continue to use the commercial merchant law system as they have, and just use the throttles like interest rates and inflation rates to direct people in one way or the other. And so there could be a very huge opportunity coming up for you here if you're prepared for it. And I would say, don't be fearful that if you don't get on your own piece of land right away, that you're not going to be able to survive the impending economic collapse. It's going to drag out for a long time. Use this time to prepare in other ways. Use this time to gather some resources that you can move around. Hone in your skill base. Build a network of people. Use things like the Freedom Cell Network. You might be familiar with John Bush. He's a friend of mine, and he's the creator of the Freedom Cell Network. Use things like that to connect with people, and then get offline and connect with people in the real world. So if you think about the 8 forms of capital, I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I've done a video on it in the past. Check that out if you haven't seen it already. But really look at those 8 forms and think about, what can you start building now to get yourself into a position where, if the opportunity comes, that you can make a quick move, put some money down, and make something happen very quickly. Because I'm telling you, there is no way that the price of real estate can continue with what it has been if the interest rates climb, especially in Canada, because we have these 5-year terms. At the end of everybody's term, they have to go back into whatever the current prime lending rate is, or the overnight lending rate is, and look at the trends. I mean, it's it's so obvious to me that this is starting to go up like crazy. And what's the number going to be? But I mean, if you just go online and put in a mortgage calculator, put in a price, and you can set the interest rate, and then put that in at 18%. So I mean, I mentioned the $736,000 average price home in BC at 6.45% is about $4,000 a month. At 10%, it's $5,200 a month. At 15% and 20%, where do you go? Because interest rates can go that high. I mean, historically, interest rates have been, at least here in Canada, up as high as 18 point something percent. So that's a trend. And sometimes pulling the lens back, playing the long game, being stoic, preparing in other ways, there's a lot of benefits to that. And you know what? On my side of things, I've actually been a prepper for a very long time. I saw the writing on the wall in 2008 with the mortgage housing crisis there. And then all the proxy wars led by Obama and just the insane neoliberal policies and the neocon policies before that, though I wasn't as awake to the neocon stuff back in the 90s. But, you know, these neoliberal policies are taking the world in this globalist, centralized direction. And we got a long ways to go on all of this. And it's not just going to be overnight. And so if you can be stoic and you can just stay the course, stay focused, get things done, keep moving things forward for yourself and your family, when the time comes, you'll be ready to make a move. And I hope to hear that some of you are doing that and you'll be prepared to do that. And I'm looking forward to talking to you on the other side. So we'll leave it there for now, folks. Again, if you want to see all of my live streams, if you missed some of them, head over to Rumble and the link is in the show notes. And check out fromthefield.tv. If you want to sign up there for 7 days for free, you can do that. And if you guys liked this video, hit the like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Check out my site, fromthefield.tv. It's where I post all my vlogs and the vast majority of all my content. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.